Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Son, yeah? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's as close as I can put it, unless I put it in my mouth. Correct, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As the brothers were mentioning, this is going to be the last episode on the life of Uthmaan ibn Affan radiallahu an. Last week, or the last lesson we did, we spoke about Uthmaan radiallahu an's time after the Hijrah. We also spoke about the Khilafah of Uthmaan ibn Affan radiallahu an. And we mentioned some of the decisions that he made, some of the contributions he made to the Muslim Ummah during his Khilafah. And inshallah today we're going to be speaking about some other contributions of Uthmaan bin Affan radiallahu anhu to the Ummah, and also we'll be speaking about the eventual fitna which took place in the time of Uthmaan radiallahu anhu, and also his ultimate assassination and death. From the things which Uthmaan radiallahu anhu contributed to the Muslim Ummah that we never mentioned before was the standardization of the Quran. So as we know, there are different qira'at of the Quran. Depending on which part of the world you come from, they may recite in a different manner. There are different forms of recitation. And during Uthman radiallahu anhu's time, Islam spread further and further to the extent where people who were not Arab were accepting Islam. North Africa, in those days, they weren't Arab speaking. Other parts of the world, Eastern Europe or Western Asia, as we'll mention inshallah, and other parts of the world, India, they started to go into India. And of course, because they never spoke Arabic, when they would learn Arabic and they would start reciting Quran, they wouldn't recite the Quran correctly. So they would put a fatha if it was a kasra, etc. They would make these kinds of mistakes in terms of the vowels and the grammar. And so Uthman radiallahu anhu wanted to, and also more importantly, in Uthman radiallahu anhu's time, these issues arised in fact later on. But one of the main issues during Uthman radiallahu anhu's time was that the people who were becoming Muslim and the forms of recitation that they may have recited in those localities, they had this level of pride in their form of recitation. Nothing wrong with having pride in reading Quran, but what ended up happening was people from certain cities or from certain areas of the Muslim world would recite in one way, and then another part of the Muslim world would recite in another way, and it would almost be like a competition. And they would almost start to compete with each other, saying that our way of reciting, our form of recitation, our qira'ah is better than your qira'ah. And so when this happened, this is when there was rivalry. There may have been this sense of competing amongst the people during that time. And of course, this is after the time of the companions. It wasn't the companions who were involved in this, because the companions understood that there are different ways of reciting the Quran, all of them revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. But it was all the others who came after that would start to compete. And Uthman radiallahu anhu was worried about this. Why was he worried? Because if you're competing, in these types of issues, in these types of things, then you may end up having certain divisions forming. For example, if I split this masjid into two, and I said this is one team on this side and this is one team on that side, and I start asking questions, there's naturally going to be a rivalry now. And this is the effect of divide and conquer also, by the way. This is the mentality. If I divide people and I say this is team A, this is team B, and then we start having competition, there's naturally going to be a rivalry. You're going to want to do better. And so Uthman radiallahu anhu was worried that they would start identifying because of the types of qira'at that they recited. But also because of this, they are going to start competing, they're going to start saying they're better, they're going to start having this rivalry, which may end up leading to hatred, enmity, okay, one saying they're better than the other, and this eventually would cause divisions amongst the ummah. So Uthman radiallahu anhu and the companions, they had this far-sightedness. It really shows us the importance of staying together, the importance of unity. Anything which disrupted unity was something which they wanted to prevent. And Uthman radiallahu anhu then asked Zayd ibn Thabit, who was the same person who compiled the Quran in the time of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He was still alive. He told him, make more copies of the copy of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And then when those copies were made, they were sent to different parts of the Muslim world. And he told them, the mushafs and the copies you have, burn them, because this is the way that we remove copies of the Quran. It wasn't as a result of A'udhu Billah, hatred or animosity of the Quran or hatred of the Quran, because this is how we remove and get rid of the Quran. What are we supposed to do? We don't throw the Quran in the bin. That's not how we are when it comes to the Book of Allah. If a mushaf is shredded, or if a mushaf is damaged to the extent where it's not able to be used, it's torn and ripped apart, then we don't just throw it in the bin, we burn the mushaf, and then the ashes, some say you can bury them or you can just throw them out, because it's just ashes now, it's not paper anymore, it doesn't have the words of Allah. So Uthman radiallahu anhu standardized the mushaf, meaning he sent the same form of qira'ah to different parts of the Muslim world, so that everybody would be united when it came to how they recited the Quran. But of course, people were still reciting in their ways, in their localities. It wasn't like it was completely gone, but from an official perspective, from the Khalifa himself, there was a standardized version of the Quran, and this is why the mushaf we have today, the main mushaf is called al-Mushaf al-Uthmani, the Uthmani mushaf, because of the contributions of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh. And then he ordered that the original copy of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, which had been written during his time, also be removed and also be banned and removed. Why? Because people would, one of the wisdoms or reasons behind this could be because people, what they end up doing in any country, in any nation that has a history, they start giving importance to things which are connected to that nation's history and past. It's very common, the crown, for example, certain items of clothing, buildings, etc. And so it would have been a political thing that may have been used, meaning somebody has this. Whoever has this, he has status, he has power, he has influence. I have the original Mus'haf of Abu Bakr Siddiq, for example. And this was done later on, of course, in many years later, in the Khilafah of, or the dynasty of the Umayyads, or the dynasty of other nations, where people would have wars and they would take the Black Stone, for example, because they would show their influence and they would say they have power because they've taken the Black Stone or because of other things. The point being here that this is why Uthman radiallahu anh made those decisions. So he standardized the Mus'haf, and everyone uses al-Mus'haf al-Uthmani. It's one of the most popular Mus'hafs that are used today. And Uthman radiallahu anh, inshallah, will be given the reward as a result of the efforts that he made. Uthman radiallahu anh, as we said, he was a businessman and he was a very wealthy man. And so when he became the leader, you can understand, because of his experience when it came to wealth, when it came to money, when it came to financial issues and the economy, he brought about more wealth to the Muslim Ummah. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, who came before him, was very, very strict when it came to what the companions were allowed to do and were not allowed to do with their wealth. He was very strict. So he wouldn't allow the companions radiallahu anhum ajma'in and others to, for example, build huge houses, big houses. Now this isn't haram, but he wanted them to maintain their level of humility. He didn't want the money and the wealth to affect them. So he wouldn't allow it. He wouldn't allow people to build huge houses. He wouldn't allow people to buy huge acres of land, okay, for financial reasons, for financial benefits, to grow crops or whatever the case may be. He wouldn't allow any of these things. Uthman ibn Affan, he allowed them to do this. And as a result of this, of course, they were more gracious, they were thankful, they had more love for Uthman radiallahu anhu as a result of these decisions that he made. But at the same time, as a result of the wealth which came in, it did have a negative impact, which we'll mention inshallah. Uthman radiallahu anhu, also because of his wealth, he never took any stipends. He never took any salary for himself from the Baytul Mal. Because he was so wealthy, he wouldn't take anything. And of course, the money he had himself, he would spend on himself, and he wouldn't take anything from Baytul Mal. And the money in Baytul Mal, he spent this money on masajid, building loads of masajid. He would give salaries to the governors of the districts of the Muslim Ummah, to the judges, to the mu'adhins, to the troops, the soldiers in the Muslim army, to those working in government, to other people who are working, repairs to the Kaaba. The Kiswa was made at this time by this wealth. He would create fountains and wells where drinking water was made more common and available to the public, and the weak and the poor were given money as well. They were sponsored and they were given money. Slaves were set free. So you can see that there is a huge influx of money, and there's lots of benefit as a result of this wealth which is coming to the Muslims. And Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu would also spend on his own family, his own relatives. And this was something which was criticized later by those who wanted to cause fitna and cause problems in the Muslim Ummah. They would say he's spending on his family, he's giving preference over his family. Uthman radiallahu anhu, he would say that this is something which is not bad. Well, why isn't it bad? Is it a good thing to spend on your family? Your wife, your children, your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, your uncles, your aunties, your grandparents, your grandchildren. Is it recommended? Is it a good thing? What does it do when you spend wealth on those who are close to you? This is from the ties of kinship, silatul rahim. I mean, anyone who spends on his family, direct family, indirect family, close family, and far relatives, no one's going to criticize him unless you have an evil intention, unless you're trying to cause some kind of issue. It's a praiseworthy thing, and this is exactly what he said. He said this is from the ties of kinship. You want me to refrain from giving to family members and my family and my relatives. And also he said, I'm not spending from Baytul Mal. I'm spending from my own wealth. So it's none of your concern. What a person does with his own wealth, and he's doing something good. But again, these were some of the things which occurred and criticisms which came up towards the end of the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. Also, there were conquests. The conquests continued in the lifetime of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. Expansions continued into North Africa and all the way to India, and places like Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, Syria was being conquered in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. Uthman radiallahu anhu continued the conquests. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, when the Qaisar is destroyed, when the Qaisar dies, Caesar, the Caesar of Rome, when the Caesar of Rome is destroyed, there will be none after him. Meaning there's not going to be any more Caesars after this current Caesar in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the death of that Caesar was in the time of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. That happened to be the last Caesar, and then the Roman Empire basically crumbled after that. So Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu was somebody who contributed a huge amount, especially when it came to the financial aspect of the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, the financial aspect of the Muslim Ummah. And for the first 6 years of the Khilafah of Uthman radiallahu anhu, there was prosperity, there was peace, there was tranquility. People were happy with Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. There weren't any trials and tribulations and fitan as occurred later on. So what caused the fitna to occur in the lifetime of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu? Before we go into that, when we get to the end of the life of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, and also when we speak about Ali ibn Abi Talib and the issues which occurred between the companions, we have to understand any issues which occurred between the companions because they are companions, we always give the utmost respect and love to the companions of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them. Radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guaranteed Jannah for all of the companions of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And we also have to understand that the companions are not perfect. They're not perfect human beings who don't make mistakes, unlike the Prophet ﷺ. And we also have to understand that the companions were of different personalities. We've given examples from the lifetime of Abu Bakr, Umar radiallahu anhu, Uthmaan, very different people. And sometimes they would even have, disagreements and clashes amongst one another. So many examples we've given of Abu Bakr and Umar disagreeing. Umar radiallahu anhu disagreeing with some companions. And there would be arguments. Voices would be raised. So this wasn't a world where these people never did anything wrong, or they never made any kinds of mistakes, because this isn't realistic. In fact, it shows us the fallibility of the companions, the fact that the companions are going to make mistakes, they are going to fall short, and this is just human nature, that every single person is going to fall into mistakes, is going to fall into errors. So we don't go into the details with regards to the issues between the companions. However, some of the scholars of the past, they would speak in detail about things which occurred. For example, Ibn Kathir rahimahullah in his book of history, Imam al-Dhahabi in his book of history, other scholars as well, they would go into detail. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah, the famous Khalifa of the Muslims, he was asked about the fitna, and he said that is blood that Allah protected us from shedding, because there was blood that was spilled. And this is something we may mention in the lifetime of Ali radiallahu anhu during his Khilafah. He said that is blood which Allah protected us from shedding, and I do not want to contaminate my tongue with it, meaning I want to protect myself. So it's interesting, why did some of the scholars of the past in books go into detail when it came to the fitna, when it came to the issues that arise between the companions in the lifetime of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu? We can understand then that there were reasons why. If a person starts mentioning and speaking about the issues and problems and disagreements between the companions, and their intention is evil, so they want people to have hatred for some of the companions on one side or on the other side, of course this wouldn't be permitted. It's not permissible, because there should be love for all of the companions. If a person had an agenda where he's trying to support some kind of group that belittles some of the companions, or he's trying to promote an agenda which promotes some companions and lowers other companions, not because of what the Prophet ﷺ said about the companion status, because some of them were of course better than others, but because of other agendas, other reasons, political or factional, to do with certain groups and sects in Islam, or for other reasons, of course this wouldn't be permissible. So the scholars who would speak about these kinds of issues, they did it for different reasons. Number one, they would do it for they felt like it was a right upon them to speak about these events with objectivity, with accuracy, and to preserve Islamic history. They felt like they had to mention these things. Also, some scholars mentioned these things because there were other groups, such as the Shia and other groups, who would distort the reality of what happened. And if you don't mention and you don't record the truth of what occurred, then of course people are going to take advantage, and they're going to distort things, and they're going to make their own truths about what happened. They're going to make up stuff about what occurred. So it's also one of the reasons why the scholars would mention this. And also, as we said, it shows us the human nature of the companions, and we're learning from the lives of the companions. The companions, they may have made mistakes, but the companions were there for us to benefit from, for us to learn from. And so they would mention some of the things which occurred. They would mention some of the problems which occurred for the sake of benefit for the Muslims. so that the Muslims don't fall into the same mistakes. They learn from the mistakes that happened before we were around in the previous nations and from the people who came before us. And Uthmaan ibn Affan radiallahu an, also these issues which are mentioned in detail by some of these scholars. And so we're not going to go into lots of detail. We're not going to mention, the reasons behind it and mention the causes and try to lower the status of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it's merely going to be something which is a source of benefit for us to benefit from, for us to know the reality of. And this will be more so when it comes to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu an, because as we know, there are lots of issues that some groups have with regards to Uthman ibn Affan, the Shias, and they have this perspective of Uthman and Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhum ajma'in, and they have their own distorted views with regards to what happened in the lifetime of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu an. So as we said, Uthman ibn Affan, the first 6 years were years of prosperity, years of peace. They had the Ummah had love for Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an. But then when there is wealth and prosperity in a community and you have lots of wealth, what ends up happening to people? They can end up becoming corrupted, or they can be spoiled. Basically, you end up becoming spoiled. So it's said that the wealthy during that time became corrupted, not from the companions of course, but from the other people who were around in the Muslim Ummah at the time. Those who may have had some status, they were wealthy, they became corrupted, and they never accepted or approved of some of the decisions which Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh had made. From the decisions was punishing some people who committed crimes. Those people who committed crimes were from the children of the wealthy and those who had status. And so they would conspire, they would come together, and they wouldn't agree with this. Of course, the wealth and the power has an arrogant effect on a person's mind. Imam al-Hasan al-Basri, he actually mentions this, meaning the causes of what happened and why the fitna started. And he says, salaries were regular. People were getting regular salaries because of the wealth and the blessing of Allah to the Muslim Ummah. Provisions were plentiful. People had plenty of provisions and food and things like this. The enemy were being defeated. In fact, Imam Hassan Basri said the enemy was defeated. So conquests were happening and the enemy was being defeated. Relationships were good between people, and there was plenty. There was plenty of barakah and blessing and provisions for the people. And Imam Hassan Basri is essentially saying that people became spoiled. And also when there isn't much fighting taking place because lands were being conquered and the Muslim Ummah was being stabilized, then people may end up turning to each other and turning inwards and arguing amongst themselves. Also, as a result of more and more people becoming Muslim, they never had the correct approach to Islam, the correct upbringing to Islam, the correct maybe akhlaq and the principles that you are supposed to have, like the companions and the tabi'in had in the time of the Prophet ﷺ and in the time of the companions. So you had a new breed, a new generation of Muslims who weren't in contact with the Prophet ﷺ. They weren't in contact with the companions. And so there may have been a level of ignorance. There may have been certain mannerisms, certain deficiencies in their akhlaq. You had less Sahaba also. Sahaba are passing away, but also Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an allowed them to travel outside of Medina. So, of course, he never had any issue with this. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an forbade them. For the most part, he would say, I want you all living here. I'm not allowing you to leave because I need you. We need to work together. We need to have consultations and shura and councils. And in the time of Uthman radiallahu anh, he allowed them to go. If you want to go and you want to live somewhere else, you're free to go. So as a result of this, there were less Sahaba in the city of Medina. Also, the personality differences between Umar and Uthman. We know of Umar radiallahu anh to be somebody who was stern and strict, and somebody who had this strict nature to him. Uthman ibn Affan was known for his haya, for his modesty. And so sometimes when you go from someone who is very strict to somebody who's almost the opposite, easygoing. Of course, Umar radiallahu anhu, I'm not saying wasn't easygoing, but he was different in terms of his personality. Uthman, maybe you could say, was more lenient on certain issues, as we've seen. With wealth, for example, you were allowed to build your own houses, big houses if you wished, as long as you abided by the laws of the land and you were giving your sadaqah and your zakah, etc. Then there's no issue with whatever you do with your own wealth. But of course, in Umar radiallahu anhu's time, there was more strictness. So when you go from strictness to ease, okay, sometimes a person may end up taking advantage of the person's easygoing nature, of a person's more merciful nature, if you like. Also, there were people who were still stuck in the mindset of Jahiliyyah, tribal loyalties, tribal allegiances, and that was still around, and it's something which, of course, is still around because it's not something which has completely gone away. Also, ambition, political ambition from certain people and certain groups. And so they would want rifts and divisions to occur so that they can take advantage and they can rule or have a higher status and maybe become the leader. So you had these kinds of issues also taking place. All of these things, they show us that things started to arise, and there were issues and problems that arose. And as we said, from those criticisms that they had was that they were saying that Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh was favoring his own relatives from Banu Umayyah. He was from Banu Umayyah. He was favoring them by giving them positions as governors, or as in government. He was giving them certain positions, and they were telling him to remove those people from those positions. You had people from Egypt and people from Iraq who had these oppositions to Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh. Notice how there were no issues in Mecca or Medina or the local area of Arabia. There were no issues here. These were places which had been recently conquered, and there were people who were not from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and so they had these types of issues. And Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh would defend his position, because he would say that I'm not hiring them because they're family members. If that was the case, then they all would be family members. I'm hiring them because of their ability to do the job properly and effectively. And also, sometimes you might want to hire somebody from your family to have a position in your business. Why? Not necessarily because he's your brother or your son or your uncle. Why would you choose him specifically? There's another reason. Trust. There's a trust issue. You know the person, you've known him all your life. You've grown up together. Okay, you can trust him. He's not going to, backstab you. He's not going to, you know his personality, you know his mannerisms, you know how he conducts himself, you know his iman, his level of Islam and his iman. And so Uthman ibn Affan, he would defend himself and he would speak about these issues also. And then, as we said, there were other issues with regards to his wealth and him spending his wealth on his family, and he said this is something which is permitted, nothing wrong with this. He said Bayt al-Mal is used for the Ummah and for the Muslim community, and he said I never spend from Bayt al-Mal, I would always spend from my own wealth. And this fitna kept on increasing, and it became more and more tense, and they became larger in number, especially in other areas, not within Arabia itself. And he never sent soldiers, because of course there were armies and soldiers, generals who were fighting on the outskirts of the Muslim empire. He never sent them to quell these rumors. In fact, it said that some of those people were taken from Iraq, and they were sent to Syria, where Muawiyah radiallahu anh, who was a cousin of Uthman ibn Affan, was the governor. And Muawiyah radiallahu anh tried to speak to them. Uthman radiallahu anh told him, these people are coming, give them, talk to them, speak to them, make them change their minds about their perception of the Khilafah and of myself and of what's happening, because they're causing problems. I have to send them out and take them out of Iraq because of the fitna they're causing. And Muawiyah radiallahu anh, it said that he would actually go there and he would speak to them, he would discuss things with them, he would try to explain to them, make them understand their mistakes and their shortcomings and how their view is incorrect, but they still never listened. But there's no example of Uthman radiallahu anh sending an army or sending soldiers to quell these rumors and stop them and punishing them for what they're doing. Why? The question is why? Well, it's a very simple answer. And subhanAllah, it's almost shocking, not just for all of us to not understand the dangers of what might happen if he does this. This would be the first time ever in history, Islamic history, that Uthman would have sent an army fighting Muslims. These people are Muslims. As far as everyone's concerned, they're not abandoning Salah or Zakah or Hajj or anything like this. They're just disagreeing with regards to Uthman being the Khalifa. And they're trying to overthrow him by being very vocal, but that doesn't necessarily take them outside of the fold of Islam. And Uthman radiallahu anh was adamant that he never wanted to cause them any harm physically. He said, I don't want to be the first one to shed blood. I don't want to be the first leader to fight my own people. The Prophet ﷺ, what would he say about the hypocrites? When he was told we should kill them, he said, no, because I'm afraid if I kill them, people will say Muhammad ﷺ kills his own companions, even though they're munafiqeen. That was with the munafiqeen. And Uthman radiallahu anh here is not with munafiqeen who are the ones causing the problems. It's regular Muslims. Yes, they're ignorant and they don't know what they're doing and they're mistaken in their ideas and their accusations, but he never wanted to be in that position. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ had told him in a number of narrations, he had told him ﷺ, that you have taken a covenant. Uthman radiallahu anh himself, he says the Prophet ﷺ took a covenant from me not to fight at the time of my death. I'm not going to fight. And he sensed that this was the reason why he was going to die. And he never wanted to fight back. He said, I will fulfill this covenant of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ said to Uthman radiallahu anh, O Uthman, it may be that Allah will vest you with a shirt. If they demand that you remove it, don't remove it. What is this shirt that's being spoken about? His leadership, his Khilafah. Don't remove it, don't step down. And so Uthman radiallahu anh said, I'm not going to step down, I'm not going to remove myself, but at the same time I'm not going to be the first one to shed blood amongst other Muslims, because that's going to open the door now to Muslims killing Muslims. And he refused to send soldiers, he refused to fight them, because he was worried if he fights them, that's going to make things even worse. And he never wanted to be the first one responsible for killing other Muslims. And there are other examples of those who opposed Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh and those who were critical of him. Abdullah ibn Salam radiallahu anh, one of the companions, he said to the Egyptians at the time, or those who were, of course when we say Egyptians, I don't want to upset any Egyptians or people who are from Iraq. It was a group of the people from those parts of the world. It said that he said to them when they were besieging Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh, that never did Allah's sword not remain sheathed from harming you since the Prophet ﷺ came to it until this very day. And others, they would say that I have heard that most of those that rode to kill Uthman radiallahu anh, they were later seized by demonic possession. They had been possessed later on in their life as a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah says that Ali radiallahu anh would curse the killers of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh after he had been killed. Sa'id ibn Musayyib, one of the scholars from the Tabi'in, because this occurred and some of the Tabi'in were around, some of the young Tabi'in who were young in age at this point in time, they would say that around 700 people came into Medina from outside, critical of Uthman ibn Affan. Some say 1,000. So it was a large crowd, large group of people coming, and the people realized that these people have evil intentions. But even in that situation, Uthman radiallahu anh refused to engage them militarily or try to stop them militarily. And they had criticisms. Those criticisms were dealt with by Uthman radiallahu anhu. They were content. They now were making their way back to their homeland. And as they're making their way back, they come across a messenger. This messenger has a letter. In the letter, it says that command their leader, the leader of this group, to be killed. It's a command from Uthman, supposedly, that the leader of this group should be killed. His hands and feet should be cut off. And they go back to Medina and they say, what is this letter? Uthman radiallahu anhu says, this stamp is mine and it looks like it's from me, but I never wrote this. It's not something that I wrote. Why would he write a letter and send it in the hands of somebody, and that person ends up going in the same direction as the group that he's criticizing and commanding the people to kill? It doesn't make any sense. So it said that there was somebody else who had made a forgery of the seal of Khilafah of Uthman, of his ring that he would use to seal the letters, and they forged his letter to cause fitna and to cause corruption. And this was done previously, numerous times, by the way. So in some instances, you had some of the Egyptians who were opposed to Uthman radiallahu anh, sending letters of forgery, claiming they were written by some of the companions or some of the wives of the companions to other people, just to instigate things, just to cause divisions and confusion. And there was one letter that was sent in the name of Aisha radiallahu anha. And when she found out, she made an oath. She said, by Allah, this is something I never wrote. I have nothing to do with this. I never wrote this. I don't know who's been concocting these messages, purporting them to be from me. So this was something which had happened previously, numerous times, where they would make up these letters to cause confusion and to cause problems amongst the ummah. So they come back, and there's more tension, there's more pressure on Uthman bin Affan radiallahu an. He's acknowledging the camel is mine, the slave is mine, the seal on the letter was also mine, but he swears he didn't write the letter. It wasn't ordered from me. I never ordered for the letter to be written. I never wrote the letter itself. And they start to surround the house of Uthman bin Affan radiallahu an. And some of the companions start to stand guard outside the house and inside the house. People like Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu an, Al-Hasan al-Hussein radiallahu anhum ajma'in, other companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abdullah ibn Zubayr even asks Uthman bin Affan radiallahu an, give the order and I'll fight. We have an army, we'll fight them. As Zubayr ibn Awam also, he says, give the order and we'll fight. We'll defend you. Uthman radiallahu an continuously tells him, no, step down, I don't want anyone fighting. And his house is besieged, surrounded for around 22 days. And of course, food and drink start to deplete in the house. You have stories of some of the companions, some of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ trying to send food and water in to the house, smuggling food and water into the house of Uthman radiallahu anh. He was in the house with his wife and his slave. Ibn Umar radiallahu anh, he says that Uthman radiallahu anh, the day that he was going to be assassinated, he's told by Uthman radiallahu anh that verily I saw the Prophet ﷺ in a dream this morning. And he told me, be strong, verily you're going to break your fast with us tomorrow night, meaning this night of ours. And he was with Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anh. He saw them in a dream together. And he was told, don't worry, you're going to break your fast with us. And so eventually he told them to stand down. The companions who were guarding the house, the companions who were guarding outside the house, he told them to stand down. Eventually they ended up entering the house, and one of them struck Uthman radiallahu an with an arrow in the head, and another tried to stab him with his sword in his stomach, and his wife tried to prevent them, and she lost her fingers as a result of this. And then their servant, who was trying to defend Uthman radiallahu an, was also killed in the attack. And Uthman radiallahu an was killed as he was reciting the Quran. And when he was killed, blood fell onto the ayah, فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Allah is enough for you, anha, rahimahullah, she left the house screaming, raising the alarm that he's been killed. And of course, Uthmaan ibn Affan radiallahu an is killed. And there were multiple narrations of how the companions were ready and willing to fight and to defend Uthman radiallahu an. Zayd ibn Thabit had with him 300 of the Ansar to defend Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an, Ibn Umar radiallahu an, as we said, and Abu Hurairah radiallahu an himself. And of course, these people are leaders in their own right. They have influence. They have people who are going to support them in any decision that they decide to make. And so Uthman radiallahu an refused, and he died in a state of reciting Quran. He died in a state of fasting, and of course his dream became true of him opening his fast in the company of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his two closest companions. And this was essentially the assassination and the death of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an. And of course, after his death, in the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib, this was the first time in history, Islamic history, where Muslims ended up hurting and harming other Muslims. And of course, it was a very dark time in Islamic history. And eventually Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an was prayed over, and he was buried. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an, and he said, more men will enter paradise through the intercession of a certain man than there are people in the tribes of Rabi'a and Mudar. Meaning, because of this person's intercession, many people will enter into Jannah, more than the people in the tribes of Rabi'a and Mudar put together. And the senior scholars and companions considered that person to be Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an. And he died after 12 years as Khalifa, when he was 80 years old, in the 35th year of the Hijrah. And Allah blessed him with many children, 17 children in fact, altogether, from multiple wives that he had. And from the lessons we can learn from the fitna that occurred is, first of all, how closely he adhered to the sunnah and the commands of the Prophet ﷺ. He was being told, don't remove the vest, don't leave your position, don't be the one to shed blood, make sure your sword is sheathed. And he continued to abide by the commands of the Prophet ﷺ, even in those times of tension where his life was at risk. And it shows us his steadfastness on holding on to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Even when it came to opposition from the companions themselves, he refused to give in. He was saying, I'm not going to be the first one to raise my hand and to cause harm to other Muslims. I'm not going to be the one to disobey a command of the Prophet ﷺ. You can imagine the pressure. I mean, his life is at risk. But he refused to be the one, because he understood the long-term repercussions of what might happen. If he ends up fighting those, it may raise even more of a problem. People will start saying he's killing Muslims. What kind of Khalifa is this? So there were other issues which may have arisen, and this really shows us the steadfastness of Uthman radiallahu an, and how he was adhering to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. We also learn about his calmness. Narrations mention how calm he was. He wasn't panicked, he wasn't stressed, he wasn't scared, he wasn't afraid. He was in fact telling people, don't guard the house. My time comes. I'm not going to raise my hand against anybody. And he was reciting Quran. He was fasting. Can you imagine, in a time when you're surrounded and people are trying to kill you, you decide, I'm going to fast today. It's not something you really think of, isn't it? SubhanAllah, most of the time people end up doing less good deeds. When they go through trials and tribulations, people do less deeds, not more. Whereas that's not what you're supposed to do. And this is a perfect example. In the last hours of his life, he's increasing in his ibadah and doing even more good deeds. In these times of trial and tribulation, he's actually increasing in ibadah. He's not thinking, I need to take a break, I need to rest, I'm too stressed. He would increase in his acts of worship, and the companions and the scholars would mention his calmness, how he was peaceful and full of tranquility. He's reciting Quran when they enter and they try to cause him harm. He's just reciting Quran. So again, it shows us his calmness, and that calmness comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This calmness during times of fitna and trials and tribulation, this is something which comes from a person's iman and belief and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And finally, we can learn his extreme care when it came to avoiding being the first one to begin any violence between the Muslims. SubhanAllah, I mentioned why do you think he never raised an army and fought? And for us, it's so commonplace to harm other Muslims, isn't it? Like, it's not something uncommon anymore. Because the scholars, they say, after Uthmaan radiallahu anhu's time, the gateway was opened, and it caused Muslims to fight other Muslims. And after that door was opened, it never closed again. Muslims have continued to fight Muslims, until today, and it will continue. And it's unfortunate. But this is something which is haram. The Prophet ﷺ told us, harming your fellow Muslim, causing them harm, their blood and their honor is something which is haram for another Muslim. Al-Muslimu man salima al-Muslimu min lisanihi wa yadihi. The Muslim is the one whose tongue and body, limbs are safe from the other Muslim. This is the definition of a Muslim. And look at the care in which Uthmaan radiallahu anhu didn't want to cause or be the first one to be involved in violence between Muslims. And it's a really important lesson for us to be very careful, because we should have a sense of brotherly love for our Muslim brothers and sisters, even if you don't agree with everything that they do or they say, and they may have their shortcomings, they may be committing sins, but ultimately at the end of the day, they are Muslims. There needs to be a sense of brotherhood and ukhuwah. And what we've seen happening in Syria and inshallah other parts of the world in the future, it just shows us when you're united and when you have this level of ukhuwah and brotherhood and united upon the deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give a person victory, Allah will give a person success. And one of the reasons why there's weakness amongst the Muslims is because of the disunity. People aren't united, people aren't together when it comes to their love and their compassion towards one another and the mercy that they have towards one another. And with that, inshallah, we're going to be concluding. Any questions before we finish? جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.